Welcome to Working on Wellness, Health and Mind's bi-weekly wellness podcast where we discuss wellness through the lenses of mindfulness, mental health, nutrition, sleep, exercise, and healthy relationships. We're excited you're with us today as we sit down with Baedke, who holds a master's in dietetics. She's also a resident in counseling. We'd like to remind you that you can learn more about the 6 tenets of wellness and how to get connected with us here at Health and Mind by clicking the link in the show notes. And Allie, this is your first time on the podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I'm so excited. Just before we started recording, I was telling you, we have not discussed nutrition yet on the podcast. And so this is just so exciting that we're finally going to get into it. I also mentioned that you're a resident in counseling. So that would mean that you hold 2 master's degrees, both in wellness areas. So I guess I'd like to start with that. What sort of sparked your interest or passion maybe for wellness?
Well, I actually went and I had gotten my undergraduate degree in psychology and just have always enjoyed really understanding kind of what makes people tick is how I would put it. But then for various reasons, I chose not to go on to get my master's at that time in psychology. But I thought, what is it that really kind of drives me? And one of the things that I'd always been really passionate about was nutrition and understanding that connection of what we put in our body and how it affects our, not just our physical health, but also our mental health. To me, that was a big deal because I kind of saw early on that connection of what I would, what I personally would eat and how I would feel. And that just really drove me to understand that connection between nutrition and health. And so I went back and I got my master's degree in nutrition. But then interestingly, kind of felt like, it was so much more than just telling people what to do or what to eat. People, even if they knew, what they should eat, at some point, I realized there was also, some self-sabotaging going on, or people just had a lot of different sort of emotional connections to food. And I wanted to be able to not just share with them what they should eat, but I wanted to actually help to understand what drives you to eat what you eat or how you eat, or what are the barriers or what are some of the things that are keeping you from being able to step into, living kind of your full life and being healthy and in a good place. So that got me going back and being that crazy person that gets 2 masters. So
Yeah, I think that's super cool because not many people hold 2 master's degrees for the reasons that you're kind of alluding to, which is it's a lot of education. It's a lot of time. It can be very costly. However, it seems like from what you've said so far and from what I know about you, it was the right move because you were approaching nutrition already from almost a counseling perspective of more the relationship with food and sort of the psychology of it anyway. So I'm curious about how these 2, areas of knowledge of yours play off of each other now that you're a counselor. Do you see yourself using nutrition in your counseling practice?
I do. I actually just recently had a client and she was describing a lot of symptoms to me that I think if I didn't have my nutrition background, I would come at it from the perspective of it's just purely a mental health issue. But after I talked with her for a while, I understood that some of the symptoms she was experiencing were actually a result of a gluten intolerance. I could tell just by talking to her that that's what, an issue was for her. And she actually went off the gluten and it dramatically affected, the way she felt and her mental health. And so, yeah, I do feel like being able to integrate, that nutrition piece into the counseling is important because I view that through the lens of, okay, is there something else going on here that we might need to address that doesn't just, where talk therapy is maybe not the only thing, not the only angle that we can go to approach that issue.
Absolutely. I think the 6 tenets of wellness, when you read them out loud, you realize a lot of them have to do with our physical bodies and how we take care of them. And taking care of what we eat is one of those central pillars of it. Again, I'm not a dietitian by any means, but I've heard of there's sort of a second brain in your gut. There's this microbiome that if you're eating things that don't align well, it can mess with you psychologically. I experienced it myself with, I've mentioned this to you before, the gluten and the dairy that don't work well for me. And
Yeah.
not only do I feel physical pains from that or slower, I also find that I'm more moody. And I was wondering if you could speak to why that is a little bit. Why is it things like gluten or dairy or anything else that you might bring up cause a psychological effect? How does that work?
Mhm. Well, something that happens is when you eat and you're continuously exposed to something that your body is basically fighting against or having an immune response against, there's a lot of inflammation that happens. But also in your gut, we have what's called microvilli. So these little things that kind of stick up and help you to absorb your food and the nutrients in your food. But if your body is reacting to that, is basically your microvilli are getting damaged. They're not absorbing the nutrients that you need, that the rest of your body needs. And so one of the things is in our brain we have what are called neurotransmitters, right? So things like dopamine that help to produce feelings that are good, healthy, and make us happy. And so if we don't have basically the building blocks for those neurotransmitters in our brain, then we are not going to feel very good. And so when you're exposed to gluten or you're exposed to dairy, and that happens to be something that your body is reacting to over time, you're not absorbing those nutrients and those building blocks you need to make the neurotransmitters to have that healthy brain function.
I see. And if I heard you right, it's not only not building what maybe like let's say I ate some food like a more protein or vegetables that would be those building blocks. It sounds like gluten dairy, it causes that inflammation. So it's actually working at cross purposes to me feeling good. So it has that negative effect, not just it doesn't help me, but it goes against.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I mentioned that, for me, it's gluten dairy. Do you notice any other types of foods have this sort of effect on people?
They're kind of these top allergens, right? So they include gluten, dairy, soy is typically a big one.
Mhm.
For some people, it's shellfish, eggs is another big one. So yeah, it kind of depends, but those are some of the big food groups that people tend to have issues with if they have issues. And we don't actually know. So there's we don't actually know whether um, some of what people may experience as a gluten intolerance may not actually be to the gluten itself. It could be, but it could not be. So what's happened is that gluten has actually become more and more and more hybridized over the years to increase the protein content of it.
Could you say that
And
one more time? I'm not familiar with that word. Hybridized?
hybridized.
What does that mean? Like
So
hybrid?
basically just genetically, like it's been genetically altered to produce a strand, like to produce strands of wheat that are higher in protein.
Ah,
And so protein is actually what your body, if you have an allergic reaction, it's to the protein in a food. So the fact that, we're seeing so many more people have gluten intolerances and allergies, maybe because we hybridize the wheat to make it, so much more, so much higher in the protein. But then there's also that issue of what that wheat is sprayed with. And so there's a question too, in terms of, are people maybe reacting to that also, in addition to the fact that it's been hybridized to increase the protein content?
hmm. So it sounds like there's a lot more than meets the eye. It's not simply avoid gluten and avoid dairy. It's that you specifically as a person will have a certain reaction to these things, and it could be impacted by the evolution of how we've chose to eat them and the things we spray on them. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
Allie, this is making me curious about how do you choose what you eat? How careful are you about what you eat now that you know all these things?
Mhm. Um, well, I mean, I eat really clean. So I typically don't eat, things that are packaged or highly processed or, um, I know for myself that I don't do well with gluten. And I knew that years ago. I actually was having a lot of the symptoms of gluten intolerance. And I had another dietitian who said to me, hey, why don't you cut out, the gluten and just see how you feel? And I did. I cut it out for several weeks and was feeling much better. When I reintroduced it, I didn't feel very good. So I did that for a couple of years. I actually was off the gluten, and I thought, well, let me just try and see if I can kind of reintroduce this back into my diet. And I went out and I had a plate of pasta, and I ate it, and I actually felt great, and I thought, this is delicious, and I'm so happy I can eat pasta again. um, but I actually the next morning, I woke up and I had such joint pain.
Mhm.
Every joint in my body was aching. And I was so emotional. I was just crying at the drop of a hat, which was not me. And so I realized, I thought, you know what, this is not, whatever this is not good for me personally. And so I'm not going to continue to ingest that. So gluten is not a part of my diet at this point. um, but yeah, I do typically, fruits, vegetables, um, seafood. Yeah, like just food, I really try to cook most of my own food, um, and eat as clean as I can. So,
I appreciate the way you mapped that out because you really gave a lot of emphasis to the preparation of the food and the types of food rather than I eat this specific thing, like I eat this kind of seafood or I eat these kinds of vegetables. It's sort of just I eat cleanly and I cook my own food. And I've heard that there are certain things to that idea of not eating processed food. But we've also sort of talked about, my diet of not eating dairy and gluten, and your diet a little bit. And I'm sure there's some overlap with this, but I'm curious, are there any truths about nutrition that sort of map onto everyone, or is diet a really, really subjective thing, or maybe a mix of both? How do you frame that?
well, I think that the truth, for everyone is that we actually need real food. We need food that grows from the earth. We need food that has not been, overly processed or synthetic. We need food that we can assimilate. And within that, there's a lot of sort of wiggle room for each individual in terms of what makes them, feel the best. Some people do really, really well on a purely vegetarian diet. Some people do really well on a higher protein based diet. So there's not a one size fits all. There truly are, people with different constitutions that just feel better eating certain foods. But the main truth and the sort of that main category is eat real food.
Hmm.
That is the truth.
And real food, as you said, comes from plants and animals. It doesn't come from made in a lab kind of a thing,
Yeah.
thrown sugars together in the chemistry lab and come out with, I'm trying to think of airheads or something. I don't know. I don't know what it comes from.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I had another question for you, and this is sort of off the cuff, but I had heard it spoken about in my family that someone in my family believes that your blood type affects your constitution as far as what you eat. Do you know if there's any truth to that, if that holds any water?
I can tell you, it's actually a doctor. His name is Peter Diadamo, and he has done a lot of research over the years in terms of blood type and diet. And there is actually research to back up what he's claiming. So he's not just out in left field. Um, I can also tell you that I've personally known a dietitian who was very seasoned and had for many, many years practiced doing exactly that with her clients, and she's had really good success. So I do think that there is something to it. And I know, even looking at my own blood type, when I looked at the food that was recommended for my blood type, I thought this is really interesting because it's all of the foods that I just sort of naturally over the years have recognized I feel really good eating. And the things that were on my don't eat list were things that I instinctively also knew I really don't feel good when I eat these. So I do think that there's something to it. Is it for everyone? I don't know about that, but I do know there's some research to back that up. And I actually worked with a doctor who was working closely with Dr. Peter Diadamo. And so I saw exactly what goes into what he does. And I can tell you that it's legit. He's serious, and his research is spot on. So
Interesting. I wasn't sure when I heard it. I thought, what, could there actually be a connection there? But I had the same experience you did, Ali, when I looked at the sheet, because they had this big printout laminated sheet I could look at. And my blood type, I actually don't even know my blood type off the top of my head, but at the time I did. And I was looking at the sheet and it mapped almost perfectly. There were a few things that I really like to eat that it said I shouldn't be eating. And I kind of had a guilty moment of like, yeah, that's kind of true. When I do eat that, I don't feel the best. I like the taste of it, but it's not really for me. So anyway, that's cool to know that there could be something there. And it leads into something that you had brought up when we were first talking about even doing this podcast, which is genetics. And I did not know that there was any kind of connection between your nutrition and genetics, or your constitution, as you put it, in genetics. Where do we even begin with that idea of genetics and nutrition?
yeah, so I guess just as a little background, I was really fortunate after I graduated to kind of go into different areas of nutrition that weren't overly conventional. And so one of the areas that I wound up in was actually working for a lab where they did blood testing and they did genetic testing. And I was actually in the role of really doing a lot of the research to try to find out how genetics impacted health, and then how we could use nutrition in order to kind of circumvent any negative effect from someone's genetics. And so it was really, really interesting. And I'll just give you an example because I think this will kind of maybe highlight the importance of that. So I had actually a couple clients who I was working with who didn't have any, they didn't know why they couldn't get pregnant. They were trying to figure out why they couldn't get pregnant and what was going on with them. And they really wanted to have a baby. So they came and I had them each of them do the labs. And it turned out that he actually had a genetic mutation. I don't know how specific to get, but he had a genetic mutation and she had one as well. In that particular gene, if you have a mutation in that gene, you don't convert an inactive form of folate or vitamin B9 into an active form. And so basically you're deprived of folate is what happens. And if you know anything about, babies and conception and development, they need a ton of folate for that to even be an environment where they can grow. And so the fact that both of these individuals had mutations in that gene was an indication that they were not converting what they were eating into an active form of folate. And so what we did was I actually had them really increase the amount of foods they were consuming that had the active form of folate in it, and then also supplemented them with a specific type of folate, not folic acid, but a specific type of folate that they didn't have to convert because they weren't able to do that well. And so within 3 months, they got pregnant and had a beautiful, beautiful child. And I can tell you it was one of the most rewarding things of my career to date, is to be able to have that couple and know they were trying to conceive and couldn't. And something just that simple could help them to bring, this beautiful life to pass. So that was awesome.
That's incredible. That you'd even think to check for that, and then once you saw it, you knew what could get them to where they wanted to be. That's really mind-blowing. That's such a cool story. How, when you say, because you're talking about how they weren't able to, one moment, I'm going to shut this window here. The breeze was nice, but I don't need to hear trucks in the background. You were talking about how they didn't have, and I'm going to mess up the word, the B9 wasn't, they didn't have enough of that to create an environment where a baby could grow. So it wasn't going to work. Is that something that happened to them genetically? It was a genetic mutation that, so is that something that they would have gotten from their parents, or is it something that happened maybe from the food they digested, or is it random?
It can be, passed down, but it can also, genetic mutations can happen because we're exposed to like ionizing radiation or chemicals or other things in the environment can cell division, like things can lead to those genetic mutation. So we don't know what caused it. We just were able to see that they both had a genetic mutation in that gene.
I've heard that there's so much that we take in from the environment that's not natural now that can do a bunch of things that we don't really know about until, we want to have a baby, or we get some sort of illness and we're like, well, where did this come from? And we find out it could be, you had, I don't even know which ones to name, but I've heard of many things that can be either in the air or in food that are completely not natural. And some people would say that that explains a lot of the health issues that we have, is not even the fact that we're choosing to eat pizza over salad, but rather that we are consuming, mindfully or not mindfully, a lot of things that aren't natural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our bodies really do need, that actual food. Like when your body sees something or is exposed to something that it doesn't recognize, right? It acts as it produces an immune response because your body doesn't recognize it. So think about what happens when people are continuously ingesting things in their body that their body doesn't recognize. So they constantly have that immune response. They have constant inflammation because their body is trying to deal with that. So, and then we wonder, why we have so much disease and illness. It's really not a surprise when you think about the fact that if you're continually putting things in your body doesn't know what to do with, you're going to mount an immune response. There's just no other way around it. So,
Yeah, it's that makes so much sense. Although I think a lot of people that aren't into nutrition think of eating something not natural as it'll just come out when I go to the bathroom. It'll go in and it'll come out. It's not something that we think about. Our body is now going to fight this alien substance, and it's going to cause inflammation, and it's going to cause us to not feel great. And
right. And is it okay that I interrupt? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, go for it.
I just had this thought.
Bring it on.
So, the, the other thing is that if you're eating something that is just close enough, but it's not actually, so let's say, in the case of folic acid, right? It's the inactive form. It's synthetic. It's what we find in fortified food. It's just different enough that it can actually compete. Like in your body, you have cells and you have receptors, right, that will allow those nutrients in. So if something is just similar enough, it actually competes with the actual nutrient that you might need. So it's not just that you're mounting that immune response and not just that you have that inflammation, but it's also that you are actually displacing in your body some of the nutrients your body would be absorbing and assimilating because it's now competing. The receptors are now competing with this other synthetic form. So does that make sense?
It does. It's kind of scary. It's like fake
Yeah.
nutrients that aren't really, that's going to actually stop the real nutrients from working. That's really that's weird too. And that's also scary because I think people will probably think, oh, it's close enough, and will think that that means it's better, when it sounds like that's even worse.
Right.
Having like one cheat meal a week, it's like, oh, I'm just going to consistently eat this synthetic stuff that's really similar. Sounds like that's even that's a worse idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
We are not meant to consume that. We are meant to consume real food. So
Well, I think
Mhm.
that that's sort of the biggest message you've sent out here today, is that we are natural beings, therefore we need to take in natural things and not mess with the synthetic stuff as much as possible. I have another sort of off the cuff thing that's come to mind that I've heard, and I was curious if you can dispel this as a myth or affirm it's true. I've heard that whether you're dieting or not, trying to lose weight or not, that it's healthy to fast for a time now and then.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think fasting can definitely be a really good thing. Your body, when you're constantly putting food in your body, your a lot of energy is being expended just to try to break down your food and to absorb it and to to use that for energy. And so if you actually are giving your body times where you're not taking in any food, you're allowing that energy that would normally be going to just be digestion to actually start working to heal and repair other things in your body. So I think it definitely has, and there's tons of research now coming out about the benefit of fasting. People are doing intermittent fasting. People are really implementing that into their lives. So again, it's one of those things where I feel like you have to really listen to your own body too and see how you do with it. Because I know there are people who have implemented it and didn't feel great. And then there are other people who really thrive on it. So again, one of those things where just listen to your body. You may be better fasting for a 12-hour period and not an 18-hour period or, extended days. You may do better with shorter fasting. But listening to your body, I think, is important.
I appreciate that message of listening to your body. I had an experience where I was trying to go, I can't remember if I was trying to go vegetarian or vegan, but it was one of the two. And I am a total meat eater. If I don't
Mhm.
have protein, I feel terrible. But I was really convicted about the morality aspect of, eating vegetarian, eating vegan. And I still am. I still think that that's probably, if you can do it and it works for your body, I think it is arguably the best way to eat. But I tried it and I went almost 24 hours. And then by like maybe the 20th hour, it was like dinner time or so. And I just couldn't stand it. I was on edge. But at the same time, felt tired and depleted. It wasn't right for my body to not have meat. And I was having other proteins. I mean, I was eating beans. I had there was like a veggie burger that we had in the freezer. I was trying to get as much protein as possible, but I think maybe it could have been the really big shift from what I was doing. And so I guess the question I have for you is, when someone's embarking on changing things, how do you kind of toe the line between listening to your body and then also trying new things and seeing what else is out there? Because I'm still not sure if that was just too big of a shift for me or if I just should never have gone vegetarian to begin with.
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think it kind of depends on what your goal is, right? So if your goal is weight loss, for example, and that answer might be different because typically, and let's say you have a hard time and you don't tend to be very motivated, then typically you do better. People do better when they actually make kind of dramatic shifts because they actually can get that immediate feedback, which is, oh wow, I'm losing weight, I'm feeling better, I'm noticing the difference, and that's going to motivate me to keep going. um, but like you said, sometimes, depending on whether you're doing something, it might be, too dramatic of a shift for you. But again, it might just be that your body doesn't thrive on, just plants. Your body may thrive on some animal sources, and that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. So I think it just really depends. It depends on the person, also depends on the situation and kind of what your aim is. But I would tell people, sometimes as I was working with them, if you really want to see how great you can feel, make a dramatic shift. Like in terms of get rid of all the packaged stuff, get rid of all the processed stuff, make that dramatic shift. Because if you just do a little like, oh, I'm going to cut out my Coke, great. That's great. That's a great start. I'm not negating that, but you're not going to really feel how amazing you can actually feel when you cut it completely out. And that in and of itself is going to motivate you to keep going.
I couldn't agree with that more, just from my personal experience, about cutting out gluten and dairy. Oh my gosh. Like I just felt like I had a whole
Tell
new
me more.
well, I just felt like I had a whole new year. I just felt like emotionally speaking, you mentioned how you had the pasta and you were all over the place. I felt so much more emotionally stable immediately. I also felt like my energy was really steady. I could sustain awareness and focus for much longer than if I were to have had any sort of dairy, like a cup of milk even. I just think started to throw me off. And so um, yeah, I can't affirm that more, that when you start to figure out what works for you and what doesn't, and you start living that way, um, I think that you can start to feel better and better. And I'm not sure if I've even found the limits of that yet, because um, I don't know. I just stopped eating gluten maybe last year. Sometimes I cheat, but most of the time I stay off of it, and it feels great. I wonder what else I could be testing for.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said dairy, you grew up in a um, drinking a lot of dairy, you said, right?
Drinking,
Or
looking back on it, it's terrifying how much I drink, like a ton of it. I told you a
that's what
story
I
about
said.
I told you a story, not an excessive amount of dairy, but like if my mom made cookies, I was drinking milk. If I in the morning I was having a lot of cereal, a lot of butter, that kind of thing. But I told you a story a little while ago. I had a friend who worked at a frozen custard shop, and during the
That's what it
summer,
was.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
during the summer, I got a milkshake from there every single day, and
Mm-hmm.
by the end of the summer, I was getting stomach aches from it. And to this day, if I have more than like a cup of ice cream, I feel terrible. Like in the moment, I feel terrible. It doesn't even take that long.
Yeah. Yeah. Immediate results.
Yeah. It's like, we do not need this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my body tells me. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Mm. Well, Ali, I had another question for you. I have two questions that I want to ask you that sort of, I think maybe this is the best one to ask first. How would you define a healthy relationship with food? What does that look like in your mind?
I think a healthy relationship with food is eating to really nourish your body, and having it be a relationship where you enjoy food and you enjoy, the social aspect of food, but that you don't kind of over, like excessively indulge, and you don't underindulge, right? That you're kind of just enjoying it, and allowing it to nourish you. But I do see a lot of people who have so much guilt around food, and yeah, there's a lot there, for people. And growing up, I think it depends on how they were, a lot of times how people were raised to view food, and to view a healthy relationship. What do you think? Curious. What are your thoughts on a healthy relationship with food?
Well, as you were speaking, it made me curious about the results of feeling guilty with food. And I couldn't help but think about this parallel between your relationship with life and food, if I can use that super broad
Mm,
term, that if you are overindulging in life or you're underindulging in life, that's an off balanceness that you don't want to fall into. But a healthy relationship with food, for me, I think it's a lot of what we're talking about, just like with life, figuring out what works for you. Some people want to go work a 9 to 5 job, and that's really comfortable. Some people want to be an entrepreneur. Very different things, but you can live a very healthy life either way. I would say with food, it's figuring out what foods work for you. It's figuring out, if you are going to indulge, having a good idea of what that looks like for you, and listening to your body when you're indulging.
mhm,
Because if I do that, I might have a cookie or two at dessert time rather than having 3 or 4 if I'm listening. So I think that awareness, that mindfulness while we eat is important, especially when indulging. Um,
mhm,
I think that there's having having some sort of consistency seems important to me. And that just might be a personality thing, but to me, if I know that I'm going to eat at a certain time and I'm having similar foods, I find my body responds better. It's almost as if it knows what's coming and it's thankful that it's that thing rather than something completely different. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I guess that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a good point too with the, when you do indulge, you said that, you just said when you do indulge. And I think that's an important point because I think that is where some of that guilt and shame come from, oh, I did overindulge. So I think another healthy aspect of relationship with food is to understand that ebbs and flows, right? So you're going to have times where, yep, you're going to have a little bit more, but not to then allow that, to shame and guilt you in a way where it negatively impacts your relationship with food, because then suddenly nothing matters and then you keep overindulging. So,
Yeah, that was another thing that just as you were saying that I was thinking the same thing, that when you start to demonize your food habits, that causes stress, that causes some really rough emotions. And I don't know about you, Allie, but I can be an emotional eater at times. If I'm really bummed about something, I find myself going to food as a comfort. And so I could see a really toxic cycle forming for people that have a bad
yeah,
relationship with food.
yeah. Well, I think, in your earlier question about fasting, I think that is one of the benefits of fasting. I realize when I'm fasting how much how I do depend on food, right? And I don't even, I'm not always aware of it until I fast. And then I recognize, wait, normally I would be eating something right now, but I'm not. So even if you think, you can think, oh yeah, I have a pretty healthy relationship with food. And then you fast and you realize maybe there's some areas that, you know, could use a little tweaking.
I
So,
think that what you're saying here is true of all of the different tenets, which is that there are levels to it. And you don't really tap into the levels until you, number one, as you've done, educate yourself on it, but then practice and try different things and realize, oh, I actually do this behavior. I thought that I had more control over this, but actually this is my normal pattern. Um,
yeah.
so I'm curious about any, because you shared a couple really great nuggets here today about um, being mindful of what you eat, not having a guilt relationship with food, but having one that's very balanced, eating food that's natural. Um, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you learned in your time getting your master's in dietetics that you think would be important for people to know about.
Hmm. I was thinking back about my education, and I really value, that I got that kind of basic foundation through my master's degree in nutrition, and that was really good. And having said that, I feel like there was such benefit in sort of where I wound up after that, because it showed me that the education, sort of the conventional education, focuses a lot on basically not so much the prevention aspect of it, but more once people are already showing up at our door, really, really sick or really unhealthy or really, really overweight, or really, really underweight. And so I felt like being able to focus a little bit more, it showed me, I think, the sort of that dichotomy once I was out in the world of, wait a minute, we don't want to focus just on how can we help people once they've already had all these issues or they want to lose weight. How can we help them on the front end of that so that we don't have to deal with all those issues that might come up? So I think it was a great foundation, but I'm also really glad that I was able to build on that.
Yeah. I found the similar deal when we were doing, the counseling grad school stuff.
Mhm.
Almost like when you live in an education mindset that's all about things that can go wrong with people's minds and with their habits and all of that, then you go out in the real world and you realize, whoa, there's such variety in people. And there's so
Yeah.
many people that have such a healthy relationship with each other or with food or with, um, so I hear that. Um, that I think that's really the name of the game too. That we've kind of been talking about is that there's a lot of subjectivity in what we're talking about outside of those big things like eating natural foods, having a
Mhm.
healthy relationship with food. Those are certain things that I don't think people can really escape. Um, so yeah. Um, I have one last question that I'm just kind of getting in the habit of asking everybody that comes on the podcast this. So here we go. Of
Okay.
our 6 tenets of wellness, the nutrition, healthy relationships, sleep, exercise, mental health, and mindfulness, where do you think you are doing the best of those six?
True. I mean, I think I fall short in every one of those areas. But I think the one that I really focus on a lot, and I think is out of necessity, is my mental health, because I think so much of that kind of affects the people that I've been called to to serve and speak into and work with, and even my friends and family. I feel like I have to be in a good place mentally to be able to do what I'm here to do. So I think that's where I put a lot of my emphasis, a lot of my focus. And I think, just my personal relationship, with God allows me to really kind of tap into that, and keeps me in a place where even when things around me are looking crazy, I can, I come back to that. So that's probably the most important aspect to me. But they're all important. Um, but
Yeah,
I would certainly, yeah, I say that one is a big one. So,
it's kind of like it's kind of like I feel like all of those hold up the mental health. They're kind of pillars that you need in order to have that
yeah,
solid mental health foundation.
yeah.
Um, what would be the one that you would like to improve the most?
Exercise.
Yeah.
I'm, yep. I'm one of those people who gets really gung ho, and I just enjoy moving my body and running, or, dancing, or whatever it is, Pilates, whatever, whatever. I do that, and I do that for a couple months, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And I feel wonderful. And then I am also that person who will come up with every excuse as to why I shouldn't be doing that today. And how all of the other things on my plate are way more important.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's my area of weakness where I really need to, yeah, buckle up.
All right. Cool. Well, Allie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us today. So much great information and a lot of just great wisdom, I would call it, about how to have a great relationship with food and what that might look like. Is there anything we haven't covered? Any kind of final thoughts that you might want to share with the listeners about nutrition?
No, I think we did cover quite a bit, and I'm happy to follow up if you have any questions that come up as a result. So
Cool. That'd be great. And Allie, I know, you have your counseling practice now, and I know you also help folks with nutrition. I'd love to kind of give you a plug as far as, any listeners that might want to reach out to you. Where might they be able to find you? Do you have any current availability? What sort of clientele do you like to work with?
yeah, so I am actually seeing clients, and they can contact the Christian Counseling Associates group. I am actually one of the resident counselors there, so they can just look that number up and contact them. And yeah, I'd be happy to. I just really enjoy kind of being that safe space for people to be able to work through some things that they might not feel comfortable sharing with somebody else. So I welcome new clients.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again, Allie. And thank you all for being a part of our WOW community and checking in with us today. Feel free to follow us on Spotify or Google Podcasts for more episodes. For questions, comments, or concerns, you can email us at intern@healthandmind.net. Lastly, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on Instagram and Facebook at HIMRVA. And all you do, keep your health in mind.